The mountain palace of Emperor Voryn sat high above the clouds, carved from black stone and old fire. Its halls were wide enough for a full-grown dragon to walk without folding his wings. Its ceilings were scorched from generations of flame. Everything about the place was built for power, and power was the only thing Emperor Voryn respected. The court gathered that morning as it did every morning. Dragons of all sizes filled the great hall, their scales catching the light from the high windows. Advisors, generals and noble families stood in their places, quiet and still. No one spoke unless the emperor spoke first. No one moved unless the emperor moved first. That was the way it had always been. Voryn entered from the far end of the hall. He was enormous, even by dragon standards. His scales were deep red, almost black at the edges, and his eyes were the color of cooling lava. Every dragon in the room lowered their head as he passed. He walked slowly, not because he was tired, but because he wanted every eye on him. He always did. He stopped in the center of the hall and turned. Behind him, half hidden by a stone pillar, stood Ash. The hatchling was small. Much smaller than a dragon his age should have been. His scales were a pale gray, dull and unimpressive beside the rich colors of the older dragons around him. His wings sat crooked on his back, one slightly higher than the other, and his neck frill was tangled and flat instead of fanned out proud the way a young dragon's should be. He was looking at the floor. Voryn stared at him for a long moment. The hall was completely silent. Then the emperor spoke. His voice was low and steady, which somehow made it worse than if he had shouted. He said that Ash was nearly 2 years old and had still not produced a single flame. He said that Ash could not complete a straight flight across the training yard without veering off course. He said that last week, during the morning bell, Ash had flinched so badly he knocked over a rack of ceremonial spears and sent 3 servants running for cover. He said these things slowly, clearly, in front of every dragon in the hall. Then he said that a hatchling like that was not fit to carry the imperial name. Ash did not look up. His small claws pressed against the stone floor. His wings pulled tighter against his back. He stood very still, the way a small creature stands still when it hopes that if it does not move, the moment will pass. It did not pass. Voryn turned away and walked to his throne. The court parted for him without a word. An advisor leaned in and whispered something, and the emperor gave a short nod, and just like that the morning proceedings continued as if nothing important had happened. Ash was still standing by the pillar. No one went to him. No one spoke to him. 1 or 2 of the younger court dragons glanced his way, but they looked away quickly. In a court built on strength, pity was almost as dangerous as weakness. After a few minutes, a senior servant appeared at Ash's side and guided him quietly out of the hall. He would be moved to the servant quarters before the day was done. The emperor had made his feelings clear enough. Cal arrived at the mountain palace just before midday. He came on foot, which was unusual. Most tradesmen who worked the high mountain roads came by cart or on horseback, but Cal had neither. He carried a worn leather bag over one shoulder and a long flat case strapped across his back. Inside the case were his tools, combs, brushes, small curved blades for scale-edge trimming, polishing cloths in 3 different grades. He had been a barber for nearly 15 years, and for the last 4 of those years he had worked with dragon clients. It was a niche trade but a steady one. He was not a large man. Medium height, lean, with careful hands and a habit of moving quietly. He had brown hair going gray at the temples and a face that had spent a lot of time outdoors. He did not look like someone who belonged in an imperial palace, and he knew it. The gate guard looked him over twice before letting him through. Cal was patient about it. He stood where he was told to stand and answered the questions he was asked and did not make any unnecessary conversation. When they finally waved him inside, he thanked them politely and followed the servant who came to collect him. The palace was exactly as impressive on the inside as it looked from the outside. Maybe more so. The ceilings in the entry corridor were 3 times the height of anything Cal had worked in before, and the walls were hung with long banners in deep red and gold. The floor was polished black stone that reflected the torch light from above. Everything smelled faintly of ash and iron. Cal walked and looked and said nothing. He was brought to a waiting room near the imperial grooming chamber and told that the emperor would see him in the afternoon. He set his bag down on the stone bench and sat beside it and folded his hands in his lap. Through the narrow window across the room he could see a lower courtyard. It was empty except for one small gray shape sitting alone in the far corner, pressed against the wall with its wings folded tight and its head down. Cal watched for a moment. Then he looked away and waited for the afternoon. He had work to do. But something about that small shape in the corner stayed at the edge of his thoughts the rest of the day, quiet and persistent, the way small things sometimes do. Cal finished with the emperor late in the evening. The grooming session had taken nearly 2 hours. Voryn was not a difficult client in the way some dragons were. He did not move without warning or snap at unexpected sounds, but he was exacting. Every scale edge had to be trimmed to the same length. Every ridge along his spine had to be polished in the same direction. If Cal missed a spot, the Emperor said so without looking at him, in a flat voice that expected correction without asking for it twice. Cal corrected without complaint. He worked carefully and quietly, the way he always did, and when it was done the Emperor dismissed him with a short nod and nothing else. A servant led Cal to a small room in the lower halls where he would sleep during his stay at the palace. It was a plain room, a narrow bed, a wash basin, a single candle on a stone shelf. Cal had stayed in worse. He set his tool case against the wall, washed his hands and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. He was tired but not quite ready to sleep. After a few minutes he picked up his leather bag and went out into the corridor. He wanted to find the kitchen or at least somewhere he could get a cup of water. The servant who had shown him the room had mentioned a supply corridor 2 turns to the left, and Cal figured there was probably a water barrel somewhere along it. He found the supply corridor without much trouble. It was a long, low-ceilinged hall lined on both sides with wooden crates and clay storage jars. Torches and iron brackets gave off a dim, uneven light. The air smelled like dried grain and something faintly smoky. Cal walked slowly, reading the markings on the crates as he passed, looking for anything that suggested water or food. He almost missed the sound entirely. It was very quiet, just a small, unsteady breath, the kind that comes after crying has gone on long enough that there are no tears left, only the shaking. Cal stopped walking and stood still for a moment, listening. It came from behind a stack of wide supply crates near the far end of the corridor. He walked toward it slowly and carefully, not making any sudden noise. He stepped around the edge of the last crate and stopped. Ash was curled in the narrow space behind the crates, pressed into the corner where the 2 walls met. His wings were wrapped around himself but they had folded wrong somewhere along the way and the left one was bent awkwardly outward, the thin membrane caught on the rough edge of the crate beside him. His neck frill was matted flat against his neck, tangled with what looked like a piece of coarse rope that had somehow wound itself into the frill during the day. He had clearly tried to pull it free and only made it worse. His eyes were shut. His sides moved in that small, unsteady rhythm of someone who had been crying alone for a long time. Cal stood very still. He did not say anything right away. He did not make a fuss or call out for a servant or back away to give the hatchling privacy. He simply looked at the situation in front of him the way he looked at every situation, quietly, carefully, deciding what it needed. Then he set his leather bag down on the floor, lowered himself slowly so he was sitting with his back against the crate across from Ash, and waited. A minute passed. Ash opened one eye. Cal was not looking at him. He was looking at the far wall, relaxed, as if sitting in a stone corridor late at night was a perfectly ordinary thing to do. Ash opened the other eye. Cal reached into his leather bag without looking down and pulled out a wide-toothed comb. He turned it over in his hands once, checked the teeth, set it on his knee. Still not looking at the hatchling. Ash watched him with the particular wariness of a small creature that has learned to expect bad things from unexpected attention. Cal finally glanced over. Not a sharp look. Just a calm, brief glance, the kind a person gives when they notice something that needs doing and are simply deciding how to go about it. He said quietly that the rope in the neck frill looked uncomfortable. Ash said nothing. Cal said he could get it out without pulling if Ash wanted. He said it would take a few minutes but it would not hurt. He held up the comb so the hatchling could see it clearly, no sudden movement, just a slow, open gesture. Ash stared at the comb. Then he stared at Cal. Then, very slowly, he uncurled just enough to move his head a few inches forward. Cal took that as a yes. He shifted forward on the floor and began working the comb into the edge of the matted frill, starting at the outermost tangle where the rope had first caught. He worked slowly. He did not rush and he did not yank. When he hit a knot he eased the comb back and started from a different angle, the same way he would with any client who needed patience more than speed. Ash held very still. After a little while the tension in the small body beside him began to ease, just slightly. The wings settled. The unsteady breathing grew slower and more even. Cal kept working and did not comment on any of it. He talked instead about small, unimportant things. He mentioned that the mountain road up to the palace had 3 very steep sections and that he had stopped to rest at each one. He mentioned that he had seen a large bird sitting on one of the outer wall posts when he arrived and had wondered what it was eating up here so high above the tree line. Ash listened. He did not speak. But he did not move away either. By the time the rope came free and Cal drew the comb through the last of the tangles, The hatchling's eyes were half closed and his breathing was slow and steady. Cal sat back and put the comb away. He did not say anything about the crying. He did not ask what had happened in the court that morning. He simply closed his bag, gave the now neat neck frill one last look to make sure he had not missed anything, and told Ash quietly that it looked much better. Then he stood up, picked up his bag and said goodnight. He found the water barrel 3 crates further down the corridor and filled his cup and walked back to his room. He slept well that night. But before he did, he decided he would walk that corridor again tomorrow morning just to see. Cal came back the next morning just as he said he would. Ash was in the same spot behind the crates. Not crying this time, just sitting, staring at the wall with his wings pulled tight and his chin low. He looked like a creature that had decided the safest thing to do was take up as little space as possible and hope the world forgot about him. Cal sat down across from him the same way as the night before. Back against the crate, legs stretched out, no rush. He had brought 2 bread rolls from the kitchen wrapped in a cloth. He set one on the floor near Ash without making a ceremony of it and ate the other one himself. Ash looked at the bread for a long moment, then picked it up and ate it quietly. That was how it started. No grand plan. No formal lessons. Just a man and a small dragon sitting in a supply corridor every morning before the rest of the palace woke up fully, sharing whatever Cal had managed to bring from the kitchen and talking about small things until the talking became something more useful. The wing folding came first because it was the most practical. Cal had noticed the way Ash carried his wings, pushed out slightly from his body, tense, like he was always bracing for something. It made him look unsettled, and it also meant the wing tips caught on door frames and crates and anything else that happened to be nearby. It had probably been causing small accidents for months. Cal asked Ash to show him how he normally held his wings when he walked. Ash stood up and walked a few steps down the corridor. The wings sat exactly as Cal expected. Too far out, too stiff, the left one angled slightly higher than the right. Cal watched and then said simply that the wings were working too hard. He said it the way a barber might say a client was holding their shoulders up near their ears. Not a criticism, just an observation about unnecessary effort. He showed Ash how to draw the wings in, not clamped tight like he did when he was frightened, but resting. Easy. The way wings sit when they belong to a creature that is comfortable in its own skin. He had Cal demonstrate the difference 3 times, tense, clamped, and resting, and asked Ash which one felt like the least work. Ash tried it. The first attempt was too stiff. The second one he overcorrected and the wings drooped. The third time he found something close to the middle and Cal nodded and said that was it, hold that. They practiced it every morning for 4 days until it stopped being something Ash had to think about. The breathing came next. Cal had noticed that whenever something startled Ash, a door slamming, a raised voice from somewhere down the hall, even just a servant walking past too quickly, the hatchling went rigid. His whole body locked up and his breathing went fast and shallow, and it took him a long time to come back down from it. That kind of response was exhausting to live with, and it also made every small surprise look like a crisis from the outside. Cal did not tell Ash to simply calm down because that was useless advice and he knew it. Instead he taught him a small trick. When the fear came up fast before it could take hold, you pushed one slow breath out first. Not in out. Long and deliberate all the way to the end. The body, Cal explained, had trouble staying in full panic when it was in the middle of a long exhale. It was not a cure. It was just a small lever that gave you a half-second of room to work with. Ash was skeptical. Cal suggested they test it. He told Ash he was going to knock hard on the side of the crate in a moment and asked him to try the breath when it happened. Ash tensed immediately just from being told, which Cal pointed out gently was exactly the pattern they were trying to interrupt. He knocked. Ash flinched, but then, a beat later, pushed out that long, slow breath. His shoulders dropped. His wings stayed close. It was not perfect, but it was different from before. They practiced that too, until the breath started coming on its own before the fear could fully land. The hardest thing to teach was the last one, and Cal almost did not try because it was not the kind of thing that came from practice the same way the other 2 did. It was the way Ash walked into a room. Cal had watched him do it several times now when servants came into the corridor or when Ash had to pass through the main lower hall to reach the courtyard. He walked like he was apologizing for being there. Head low, steps small and quick, eyes on the floor, trying to get from one side to the other without being noticed. Cal told him about a thing he had learned early in his work with difficult clients. He said that the way you enter a space tells everyone in it what to expect from you before you open your mouth. He said it was not about being large or loud or impressive. It was simpler than that. It was just about walking like you had decided you were allowed to be there. Ash asked how you decided that when you were not sure it was true. Cal thought about it for a moment. Then he said you started by deciding it was worth finding out. He showed Ash what he meant. He walked the length of the corridor twice. Once small and apologetic, once just steady and even and unhurried. The difference was not dramatic. But it was real. Ash tried it. He was not perfect at it. But he was trying, and trying in a new direction was more than he had done in a long time. The servants noticed within the week. Not loudly. Just small comments passed between them in the kitchen and the lower halls. That the young hatchling seemed different lately. Steadier. Quieter in a calm way instead of a frightened way. None of them knew about the morning sessions in the supply corridor. But Cal knew. And Ash knew. And for now that was enough. The court gathering was not something Ash had been invited to. He knew about it, the way everyone in the lower halls knew about it, through the sound of extra footsteps above, the smell of ceremonial oils drifting down through the vents, the sharp voices of senior servants giving orders about seating arrangements and floor polish and the exact temperature of the fire in the great hall. It had been building for 2 days and now it was here, and every dragon of importance in the Mountain Kingdom was somewhere upstairs being impressive at each other. Ash was in the lower courtyard. He had taken to spending time there in the late mornings since his sessions with Cal had given him something to do with his body other than press it into corners. He practiced his wing position. He practiced his breathing. Sometimes he just walked the length of the courtyard slowly back and forth, working on the way Cal had shown him, steady, unhurried, like he had decided he was allowed to be there. He was not perfect at it yet. But he was getting less imperfect, which Cal said was exactly the right direction. The lower halls that connected the courtyard to the stable corridor were busy that morning because of the gathering. Servants moved back and forth carrying trays and linens and long decorative banners that needed hanging before midday. Everyone had somewhere to be and most of them were moving faster than usual. Ash stayed out of the way. He had learned where the quiet edges of a busy space were. He was near the far wall when he heard it. It started as a sharp bang from somewhere inside the stable corridor, something heavy hitting the ground, and then immediately after came the sound that everyone who works around large animals learns to recognize and fear. Fast and uneven, the rhythm of something that has panicked and has no plan except away. The doors at the end of the stable corridor burst open. The creature that came through was a draft animal, broad and heavy, used for pulling supply carts up the mountain road. Normally it was one of the calmest animals in the palace. But something had frightened it badly, a fallen torch, a sudden sound, nobody would know exactly what until later, and now it was in the lower hall with its eyes wide and its hooves striking sparks off the stone floor and absolutely no intention of stopping. 3 young servants were at the wrong end of the hall. They had been carrying a long wooden bench between them when the doors burst open, and now they were pressed against the wall with the bench held in front of them like a barrier, which would not help at all if the animal came their way. They were shouting for help. One of them had dropped her end of the bench and was trying to find a door handle behind her. There was no door handle. It was a flat section of wall. The animal swung toward them. Ash moved before he thought about it. He crossed the hall in a straight line, not fast in the way of something charging, but purposeful in the way of something that had decided where it was going. His wings came in close the way Cal had shown him. His head came up. His steps were even on the stone floor. He put himself between the animal and the 3 servants. He was not large. He was a small, pale gray hatchling with a slightly crooked wing and no fire in his throat, and the animal was 3 times his weight. None of that registered in the moment. What registered was that there were people behind him who needed a wall, and he was the closest thing available. He faced the animal and held his ground. The draft animal pulled up short, surprised. It had been running from something and now there was something in front of it that was not running. It was not charging either. It was just standing there, steady and quiet, taking up space with a kind of calm that did not match the noise and panic of the last 60 seconds. Animals are not complicated about these things. They do not respond to speeches or explanations. They respond to energy. And the energy coming from the small gray hatchling in front of it was not fear and it was not aggression. It was just stillness. The animal slowed. Its hooves shuffled on the stone. Its breathing was still fast and ragged but its head dropped a few inches, which in an animal that size means something is starting to change. Ash held the stillness. Long breath out the way Cal had taught him. Slow. Deliberate. He did not reach forward. He did not make any sudden sound. He simply stayed where he was and let the quiet come off him like something real. Behind him, in a low and steady voice, he told the servants to move to the left. Slow. No running. They moved. He tracked them by sound, keeping himself between the animal and where they had been until they were far enough down the hall to be clear. Then he began to step sideways himself, slow and gradual, giving the animal a clear line back toward the stable corridor without anything blocking it. The animal watched him. Then it took one step forward, then another, and then it was moving back the way it had come, still unsettled but no longer blind with panic. A stable hand appeared at the far end of the corridor and took over from there. The hall went quiet. The three servants stood together near the far wall, breathing hard. One of them was shaking. They looked at Ash and did not quite seem to know what to say. Ash looked back at them and said nothing either. High above the lower hall, set into the stone wall, was a long balcony that looked down over the corridor. It was used during inspections and formal processions. It was not part of the main gathering hall, but it connected to it, and anyone standing on it would have a clear view of everything below. Emperor Voryn stood on that balcony. He had stepped away from the gathering for a moment, a brief pause between formalities, and had heard the commotion below and walked to the balcony edge to see what it was. He had seen all of it. He stood very still with his large claws resting on the stone rail and his eyes fixed on the small gray figure in the lower hall below. Ash had not looked up. He did not know his father was there. Voryn did not move for a long time. He did not call down. He did not summon anyone. He did not say a single word. He just stood there and watched the spot where his youngest son had stood, long after Ash had quietly walked back toward the courtyard and the lower hall had returned to its ordinary noise. His expression was not easy to read. But his eyes did not move from that spot for a long time. The summons came the following morning. Cal was in the middle of his breakfast when a senior servant appeared at the door of his small room and told him, in a polite but very firm way, that the Emperor wished to see him. Not for grooming. Just to speak. Cal set down his cup, wiped his hands on a cloth and followed without asking questions. The throne room was different when it was empty of the court. Bigger somehow and quieter in a way that had weight to it. The long banners hung still. The torches burned without flickering. Every sound Cal's boots made on the stone floor came back to him from the walls like an echo that did not quite want to let go. Voryn was not on his throne. He was standing near the far window looking out over the mountain range below. His back was to the room. He did not turn when Cal entered, but he spoke, which meant he had heard the footsteps and knew who they belonged to. He said, without any introduction, that he had been on the balcony yesterday. Cal stood where he was and said nothing. Voryn said he had seen what happened in the lower hall. He said he had watched the whole thing from the beginning to the end. Then he was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again his voice was lower than before, and slower, like a large thing moving carefully over uncertain ground. He asked Cal what he had done to the hatchling. It was not an angry question. It was not an accusing one. It was the question of someone who had seen something they did not fully understand and had decided, after a night of thinking about it, that they needed to. Cal considered the question honestly before he answered. Then he said that he had not done very much. He said he had found Ash in the supply corridor on his first night and had combed out a tangle in his neck frill because it looked uncomfortable. He said he had come back the next morning because the hatchling had seemed like someone who was used to being left alone and Cal did not see any good reason to leave him that way. He said they had spent some time together every morning after that working on small things. Wing position. Breathing. The way a creature carries itself when it has decided it is allowed to take up space. Voryn turned from the window. He looked at Cal for a long moment. Not with anger. With something more complicated than that. He asked if that was all. Cal thought about it again. Then he said there was one more thing. He said that at some point during those mornings he had told Ash plainly that the way his father measured worth was not the only way worth could be measured. He said he hoped that was not overstepping, but he was not going to pretend he had not said it. The Emperor was quiet for a long time. The torches burned. The mountain wind pressed against the outside of the window. Somewhere far below in the lower halls, the ordinary sounds of the palace morning continued without knowing they were background noise to something important. Voryn said finally that the hatchling had stood in front of a panicked draft animal 3 times his weight and had not moved. Cal said yes. Voryn said he had done it without fire. Without claws. Without any of the things a dragon was supposed to use. Cal said yes. He said Ash had used the only things he actually had, which were steadiness and a clear head and the decision to put himself between danger and people who needed help. He said quietly that those things were not small. He said most creatures 3 times Ash's age did not have all 3 of them at once. Voryn looked at him. Cal met the look without flinching, the way he always did, because he had spent 15 years working close to large and powerful creatures and had learned that flinching rarely improved the situation. Then Cal said the last thing. He said he had done nothing that Ash could not do on his own. He said all he had really done was make sure the hatchling knew that one person believed he could. He said that was not a lesson he had taught Ash. It was just a fact he had made sure Ash knew. He said sometimes that was the whole thing. Voryn said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the door at the side of the throne room, the one that led to the interior staircase going down through the palace levels. He did not tell Cal he was dismissed. He did not tell Cal to follow. He simply walked, and Cal stood where he was, and after a moment the Emperor's footsteps faded down the stairs. Ash was in the lower courtyard. He was doing what he did most late mornings now, walking the length of it slowly, working on the things Cal had shown him, not because anyone was watching but because it had become a habit, and habits, once built, were hard to put down. He heard the footsteps before he saw who they belonged to. They were heavy footsteps. Slow and deliberate. The kind that belonged to something very large that was choosing to move carefully. He turned. Voryn stood at the entrance to the courtyard. He was without his court robes. Without his advisors. Without any of the things that usually surrounded him and made him look like an emperor rather than just a very large, very old dragon who had made a serious mistake and knew it. Ash went completely still. Voryn walked across the courtyard and stopped a few feet away. He looked down at his youngest son for a moment. Ash looked up at him and did not look away, which was new, and Voryn noticed it. Then the Emperor lowered himself slowly until he was sitting on the courtyard floor. It was a strange thing to see. Voryn on the floor of the lower courtyard, in the ordinary morning light, with no ceremony around him at all. He said in a quiet and even voice that he had been wrong. He did not dress it up. He did not explain it at length or surround it with conditions. He said it plainly, the way Cal had taught Ash to do things, steady, direct, no unnecessary noise around it. Ash did not say anything for a moment. Then he walked forward and sat down beside his father, close enough that his small shoulder was against the Emperor's foreleg. Voryn did not move away. They sat like that in the quiet courtyard, the enormous red Emperor and his small gray son, while the mountain wind moved around them and the ordinary palace morning continued on all sides. Neither of them said anything else for a long time. Neither of them needed to.